All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our final event this semester. And thank you, Chris, for coming here to speak. It's a pleasure to have you at the forum.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
My name is Hari. I'm a student at the university studying mechanical engineering, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. Before we get started, I'd like audience members to note that we'll be facilitating an audience Q&A at the very end of our discussion. So if you have questions for Chris, please save them for them. With that said, I'd like to start our conversation off by talking about your childhood and what got you into programming. So, your first few attempts at programming involved very conventional languages like C++, but you found your breakthrough when you encountered PHP, an open source language, meaning unlike the Javas and the Cs, here source code can be modified by anyone on the internet. You went on to credit the community and the engagement surrounding the language as the reason it stuck. Were there any early experiences in your life that influenced you to resonate with a language like PHP?
That is a fantastic question. Is it possible to turn it down a little bit so there's not that squeaking thing? Because I get distracted by squeaks. But nobody showed me any of the questions ahead of time. So this is really exciting for me to get the questions and have to think about it. And you did a lot of your homework. No one has ever asked me a question like that before. But I think for me, being a self-taught programmer, first of all, does everyone here appreciate how cool it is that you go to Berkeley? Because I grew up in Ohio, in Cincinnati, and I grew up learning about BSD and Unix and all of these things, TCP/IP, that came out of Berkeley. And so the BSD, Berkeley stuff, and the open source licenses, for me, this was always a place where it's I want to go be near those people because the energy that's emanating from there, it's not about business, it's not about trends and marketing, it's about people who think they can make computers better. And when I was growing up in Cincinnati, the idea was you'd go to school for computer science and then you'd go work at Procter & Gamble and you'd help them build an assembly line using software so they could make Tide detergent or something like that. But I was looking at the web and I was looking at things, if anyone had ever used Flash when you were young. There was something called Flash for a while. And I didn't see myself as wanting to write software so I could get a job or go work on assembly lines. I just wanted to make computers move and just play with things that way. And so I was trying to find anything that I could use to make a computer move, to build a little tool for myself, or just play around that way. And when I found PHP, which is really when I found the open source community, I think what was so special about that was the community. Particularly for me growing up in Ohio, none of my friends were programmers, and I didn't know a lot of people or where to go to ask these questions. And so now I feel like I would go to dev.to or GitHub or something like that, and I would start trying to find people who are working on projects that are similar to me. But when I was growing up, I had no idea what those things were. So when I found PHP, it was just the idea of, here's just another tool that you can use to build stuff. And what it showed me and what led to for me was the open source community, was SourceForge, with all these people posting stuff online. And that was for me a way to get better. Is I finally could find people where I could send them stuff I was working on and they could send me back their review. And I could work with people on projects, and nobody knew that I was 17 years old also at the time. So I was just hiding that because I was trying to pretend like I was a real programmer. I felt like I had a deep sense of imposter syndrome. But ultimately for me, a lot of where GitHub came from was me trying to replicate, I know this is not your question, but I'm jumping to it. A lot of what GitHub was experiences that I had by chance, where I randomly found the open source community. I randomly found a mentor to show me how to do open source. I randomly got Linux installed on my computer when I was younger. All these things sort of happened to me by chance and showed me the open source community. There's a way to build things with other people. There's a way to, there's people out there that are doing really cool engineering things, and there's a bigger world. I started feeling once I got in there, how can I bring more people into that with me? And how can I share that with more people? And so I think the open source community is everything I've ever done is based on that, and everything I'm trying to do is to help more people get involved in some version of that.
Got it, thank you for sharing. I want to fast forward a little bit to your years right after you decided to drop out of college. For many of us, leaving school midway to go build a company seems like this timeless stunt pulled off by the big tech CEOs. But when you left your English degree behind at the University of Cincinnati, you didn't immediately go on to become a founder. So instead, equipped with self-taught programming knowledge and on-the-job hunt, how did you navigate this time in your life?
Yes, it's very romantic to be a successful college dropout. But it only gets good when you're like 40. When you're actually doing the dropping out, it's horrible, and it's the worst thing. For me, it was just really trying to find my like thing in life and being stubborn enough to feel like I wasn't going to stop until I figured out what that was. And I originally went to school for English because I felt like that would be an asset no matter where I landed. Like English is a good skill to have, good grammar, good writing, especially with computers, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. And so in terms of dropping out of school, I knew that going to University of Cincinnati for English was not going to be a thing that I wanted to do. I knew that going to the University of Cincinnati for computer science to go work at Procter & Gamble was not a thing that I wanted to do. And I knew that I liked websites. Those are probably like the three biggest thoughts that I had in my head at the time. And I also had to, I was very aware of, my sister was about 8 years older than me, and I had some friends that had siblings that were older than them. So when I was going to college, I was super aware of student debt, and I was really afraid of it. And I didn't feel like I had a career path in mind where I could like spend a bunch of money on school and then pay that money off. I had no real financial prospects, is what I'm trying to say. So what I thought I would do is get a job making websites and just go live somewhere cool. So when I dropped out of school, I got a job working for Alliant Internet, which is a trucking logistics company in Hackensack, New Jersey, which is kind of a suburb of New York City, is what people from Hackensack would tell you. But people in New York would not tell you that. They would say it has nothing to do with New York City. I agree with the people from New York. So I dropped out of school because I did not like school and I couldn't afford it, I didn't want to pay for it. I'd already been programming for a while. I really wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go be a founder and do all these things. I was like, I think that I need to leave Ohio because there's nothing for me here at all. And so maybe I can use this programming thing as like a part-time job for a while and go get an apartment in Chicago. And just not really, I think the other side of it was I could just end up back here. And I want to figure out if there's something out there that I really like doing, because the worst case scenario is I'll end up back here working at Procter & Gamble. And that's probably not that bad. But I think I had this idea that I should go out there, I should try it, I should figure out what's out there. And so I ended up living in Hackensack, New Jersey, working for Alliant Internet. I could talk a lot about what they did at that company because it seems like a fever dream, but basically like way before mobile phones, but after the internet, there were these companies where people would own 18-wheelers, these big truck drivers, right? And they would own their own truck. They'd be owner operators, independent. And so they would pick up gigs like I bring a load of cargo from Target in Delaware to Target in Colorado. And then I want to go back to Delaware. I think this is what they were doing, but basically that they were like for hire, contractors for hire. And so the company I worked at, it would sort of figure out who's out there and try to coordinate the cargo systems with the truck drivers. But the truck drivers didn't have computers. They all used fax machines. So they'd fill out this. And so this was a point in my life when I thought fax machines were like ancient technology. So I'm sure for a lot of you, it's also very hard to believe. But they would fill out this form, they would fax in like where they're gonna be, their truck driving situation. And then we had a piece of software that would scan the form and it would OCR it into a website, and then it would try to like figure stuff out. It was just as exciting as it sounds. But I was like, maybe I'll be in New York and this will be a fun job. While I ended up in Hackensack, it was not a fun job. It was not close to New York. And so that's when I was like, I think what I need to do is just try this traditional path of computer science. Because I feel like at this point, my story is confusing, because it was confusing. I was just sort of bouncing around. I thought I could be a programmer, but I wasn't very excited about it. Didn't know where to land. So I had resolved myself, I'm gonna go to school, I'm gonna get a computer science degree. And that was the summer when my friend had told me, oh, are you still looking for like a job in California? Because GameSpot, this video game website, is hiring programmers. And so that was the point at which I had told myself, well, like everything I had decided about settling down, I could probably just try one more time. So I moved to California, and everyone was like, didn't you just do this? Like you just moved to New York City, now you're moving to California. I was not winning a lot of fans or trust or faith, but what I did have was I really wanted to do something I cared about. And I think that was like the driving behind all of this is when I got the GameSpot job. It's GameSpot.com. It's a like a video game news website, right? They do video reviews of games and things like that. And I think I was just trying to find out, like, I want to go in somewhere every day and I want to just enjoy what I do. And at that point in my life, I had not found anything like that. I had found lots of things I didn't want to do. And I, had friends and older folks who had jobs that they seemed miserable at. But for me, there was this like driving thing of like, I just need to find a thing that I'm going to really like doing. And I need to buy myself time until I find that. So when I got the GameSpot job, I moved to California. I was like, video games, there's something really here about this website. It's so crappy. There's so many bugs. Nobody here really knows computer science. The website goes down every day, and everyone loves their job. The customers, the users are so happy. Like on paper, this is a disaster, and yet it's great. Everyone loves working on it. So for me, I think when I was there, when I first moved to California, I went to GameSpot. That was when lightning struck, and I was like, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a place where the people who are building it are also the consumers of it. And so like that's the way that I know how to work on stuff, is that you have like the beta testers are in the room. They're the ones that are buying it. And I didn't realize that what I was looking for and what felt wrong to me at Procter & Gamble was like I was not someone that was testing new toothpastes all the time. I was not someone that was trying different laundry detergents all the time. It was like I was not a consumer of those products. And same thing, I'm not a truck driver. But when I got the GameSpot job, that's when it was sort of, like I said, lightning for me. It's like, I need to work on stuff where I'm going to be the one using it, because that's the only way I know whether it's good or not. Because I know what I don't like, and I know what I do like. And then from there, I was like, I just stopped everything. I stopped playing World of Warcraft. I stopped smoking weed. I stopped drinking as much as I'd done in college. And I was like, all I'm going to do now is this. And I'm going to push this as far as I can go. And how do I be the best programmer? How do I be the best employee? How do I be the best at making websites? And how do I be the best at making things for people like me? And that's what the doors that I think GameSpot unlocked for me that, again, kind of leads to something like GitHub, where I was like the first user of GitHub and still use GitHub happily to this day. But.
Got it. And also just as a follow-up, culturally, what was that shift like, moving from the Midwest to the Bay Area?
It was horrible. I mean, for me, I'm like, I grew up on John Deere tractors. I'd never had Thai food till I moved out here. I was like very much kind of a stereotypical, it's like what I look like, So I wanted to go to the big city and I wanted to go to California, but I thought San Francisco and LA were like the same thing. So like for me growing up, Tony Hawk, I'm like, oh, everyone's like skateboarding and rollerblading in shorts and there's palm trees. They are skateboarding, they are rollerblading, there are palm trees, but they're not as much in shorts as I thought in San Francisco. So I didn't know about like, I just thought it was just California. Just all of California is good. So for me, I remember, this is a true story and I'm not making this up, and it sounds completely made up, but I walked, when I moved to California, I walked to work. The CNET building was downtown, 2nd and Howard, and I lived up in like the Tenderloin. So I'd walk every day, Tender Knob, and I passed a bar, and there were two people out front of the bar, and they were arguing about Subversion versus CVS, the two big version control systems that predate Git. And when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, that's really spooky. But that was like my first week in San Francisco. I'd never had a conversation in my life before with someone about programming. And I was hearing like drunk guys argue about stuff that I had an opinion about outside of a bar. So for me, it was like I landed in the right place. And I think I was really cognizant of the fact that I had dropped out of college. I didn't really know as much as people that were going to things like Cal. And all I could do was like work as hard as I could work and work smartly, learn as much as I could learn. So, talking about the cultural shock about sushi and things like that, and just walking around in a big city, seeing homeless people for the first time, not even knowing what that is one side of it. The other side of it is I started going to meetups all the time. We hosted MySQL meetups at CNET. I started going to Ruby meetups. At the first Ruby meetup in San Francisco, there were 12 people there. That's before like Ruby and Rails and things like that. There was no JavaScript meetups. There was no Node.js, if anyone can believe it. But there was tons of them. There were PHP meetups. And so I immediately started doing all sorts of stuff like this, going to stuff like this, seeing people talk, meeting folks, and bringing my version of the open source community into real life. And so For me, that's a thing now, even still, when I have friends or founders are asking about Minnesota or Chicago versus San Francisco or San Jose even. And I think it's really about just like what kind of people are there, what kind of things are there for those people to do. And if there's, New York, for example, has like a really thriving design scene. And so if you're trying to hire lots of designers and people who are into design, that's a great place to do it. But if you're trying to hire like Git engineers, I don't know that there's that many in St. Louis, something like that. There's a lot of them out here. So for me, it felt really cool to be there. And I just felt like maybe the way a lot of people feel when they go to college and they're a freshman and they got to a school that they're really excited about. I just never had that till I landed in San Francisco at GameSpot. And I was like, it's all here and I have the opportunity and now I need to go do something with it. So that was like the next, 11, 15 years of my life, I guess.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. After a few years of acclimating to the cultural scene in SF, you and your friends launched GitHub because you needed it for your day job and for side projects. It was only after companies started emailing you guys asking to pay for private repositories that you realized that you could commercialize this. So whereas many founders seek a market out and then strategize ways to penetrate it, in your case, it seems like your market almost found you. How did your approach to leadership evolve during such an organic beginning?
We were the market. I think that's part of the GameSpot thing. And the people who were coming to us, I know exactly the interview you're talking about, and I know exactly who the person is, Jeffrey Grossenbach, Top Funky. And like, I'll never forget Jeff coming and saying, I want to pay for this, because it was such an amazing moment. But it didn't matter. For us, one of the things I was saying, we talked briefly before, there's a lot of things about my story that I think are like super cliche. College dropout, programmer, redhead, that kind of thing. But there are some parts of it that are super unique, which is the fact that we were self-funded and bootstrapped for the first 4 years. And there are not many companies, I think, at all that start out bootstrapped, self-funded, and then make the transition into like classic VC funding. And that's exactly what we did. We took money from Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia, which are like, in my mind, two of the most stereotypical classic, these are VCs that there are. So I don't think that the way we did it is for everyone, and certainly a lot of investors would say not to do it the way we did it, but the point of GitHub in the early days was, we're gonna build something. We did want to make money off of it. Tom especially had just sold Gravatar, which was a side project that he had done to WordPress. He'd made a little bit of money, and Gravatar was a free service that Tom offered to folks. And it got really popular, relatively speaking, and it had server problems because people were using it, and nobody paid for it. So he had all these users that were just like angry at him all the time because it was down and no one was paying him money. And so he was like paying the server bills, doing his own free volunteer work, and everyone was just mad at him. So Tom had this idea of like, when I do my next thing that's a side project, it needs to at least be able to pay for itself. So they'd be like, these people are mad at me about it being down. Well, like, give me $5, you know what I mean? So I can pay for that. So Tom was coming from that mentality. He was working at PowerSet, which was a natural language search startup at the time, way before we had LLMs and things like that. So I think Tom's idea was, I'm going to do a side project that for me can make some money and I'll really like, but I'm working at a startup, PowerSet, and this is going to be great. For me, I was doing lots of consulting at this time. Fast forward, it's distant into the future. We're talking like 24 months after I arrived in San Francisco. I've already quit CNET. It did not go great. GameSpot went awesome, but I transferred to the food department and it did not go great for me or for them. So I ended up quitting or maybe getting fired. But I started consulting and doing freelancing. I started blogging, which for the young people is like, YouTubers. It's the old ancient version of YouTubing. So I was blogging with a technical blog talking about Ruby and Rails and JavaScript and things like that. And so I was doing lots of like consulting gigs and getting like into new systems often. And so for me, there was a lot of friction about joining onto these teams to like do work with them because they were all doing different things. And a part of where GitHub comes from is like, well, I need something. And so it's like, well, Tom needs something as a side project for himself that he wants to make money of. I have a business that I need something for. And when we start working on it, the worst case scenario, I like to think in worst case scenarios. The worst case scenario is we end up with a tool that we're using every day. And so that was like, for me, the greatest place to be. And it's like, we're gonna build this and we're gonna use it. And if no one else uses it, like, that sucks for them because it's good. But if everyone else does use it, how great would that be? So from the beginning, it was, again, like, I feel, you hear these quotes like, if you want lightning to strike, you got to go put out some lightning rods, meaning you can't just like sit in your room and try and hope that you're going to be lucky. And so I feel like that has been my life, is there's been a series of moments where I'm like, oh, this is like a special thing right now, and I should probably push this and see where this leads. And there have not been too many of them. And one of them was coming out to San Francisco. But I think maybe the next one was, well, when we first started working on GitHub, and I first started using GitHub. And I was like, this is really good. And I'm not just saying that as a fan of myself. I'm saying that as a fan of planet Earth and humans and building software. And that's when it was like, wow, I mean, maybe our worst case scenario is something way bigger than just us using it. And I just, at that point, I was just this open-minded place of, I want to work on stuff that I care about. I want to build stuff for myself. And when we first started using GitHub, I was like, this is so good that this might actually be something real. And I'm going to, once again, like bet everything on that. And so what happened was, I was working on it full time. Tom was working on it as much as he could. And what Jeffrey Grossenbach emailed us and said, I want to pay you all to host my projects there. We'd always planned to charge money. We thought it was going to take us like a year or 6 months or 7 months. And he, within days, was saying, I want to pay for this. And so that was really the thing. It wasn't as much, and maybe we said this was, and this maybe is like the way we tried to spin it, but it wasn't like, oh, we didn't know we would ever make money off of this. We wanted to make money off of it. It was like, oh, this might be a lot bigger and a lot better than we thought. Like, this is happening way quicker, and like, what do? You just, I don't know. I've never been surfing, but I imagine it's like surfing. It's like if the wave is big, you just keep surfing, right? So that's what happened. And I think for both Tom at that point, when Tom saw that, he's like, I got to get out of this startup job. But that's what it was when our friends, people we trusted, because there's another side here. I don't know how many people here have built things and you try to get your friends to use them. Your friends don't want to pay for stuff. Your friends are like, I know that person. They should give it to me for free. I always thought my friends who supported me would be the ones who were first in line to pay for the things that I built. But they want free stuff, right? I want free stuff from my friends. So I'd learned that with other projects, and that was a part of it. When we launched GitHub, our friends were like, we want to pay. And I was like, this is new, because I'd been trying to make money off of them for years. And so there was just a lot of things where just, I think, recognizing how these pieces are working, and then things that we're skipping over, which is like the previous 2 years of like, I had built a wiki, where we had done code hosting sites. We had done all these other things that didn't work, and we'd gotten out of our systems, and we'd been sort of in this mentality of we've failed a couple times at things in the periphery. So when something that looked like maybe a success popped up, I think we were in the position to recognize it because we had been trying stuff. I think that you're never gonna have something like GitHub on your first attempt, and if you do, you might not even recognize it. I mean, I may have had good ideas out there and even had good projects that I didn't capitalize on because GitHub happened for me at the time that I was ready for it, if that makes sense.
I wanted to go back to your point on bootstrapping. So for context, many startup founders decide to pursue outside sources of funding like venture capital. The alternative is to bootstrap, which is to self-fund GitHub, which you guys did for the first 4 years. Parallels like that can be seen in other industries. For example, like a musician might decide whether or not she should independently publish or she should go sign off with a record label and relinquish some creative freedom. I'm wondering if you have advice for people in the audience that might find themselves at a similar crossroad.
I have done both. And I think that they are tools, and every tool has a purpose. And I don't think that we felt that way. I think that when GitHub started being successful, we were really young and we started thinking like, oh, we're gonna figure out the way to run a company and the way to build a company and the way to scale the company. But Dropbox was growing around the same time as we were growing. Stripe was growing the same time we were growing. These companies all need to run very differently, I think. And they have different needs. And so one of the reasons that we self-funded and bootstrapped GitHub was that we were really afraid of ceding control, giving up control to business people who we sort of assumed wouldn't fully understand what we were doing, because we didn't even fully understand what we were doing. GitHub was sort of so new in terms of people weren't really paying for developer tools. Social network stuff wasn't everywhere. Like cute Octocat stuff, like Kawaii stuff wasn't cool at all for developers. And we felt that it was. And I kind of was like, I didn't want to argue with some old guy about it when I didn't have to. And that was really like, well, we don't need them, right? And so why should I put myself in a position to like explain why there's a cartoon octopus? Like, you get it or you don't. I don't know. I don't feel that way anymore, but I think a part of it was not being able to put into words what was happening. And a lot of what we were doing was trying to go on intuition and feeling. And we felt like it was right because we were using it, but it was so hard to explain what we were doing. And I think that's okay. I think like following your gut is maybe the thing I'm going to turn this into, like what the advice is there. And our gut said to not go with venture capital and to try to figure it out on our own, to let it grow until we understood what it was and what the business was, and then frankly to swing the power from these people with all the money to us. And wouldn't it be great if they were asking our permission to invest on our terms instead of us going to them being young and naive? Like again, at this point, I'd already screwed up and I'd already told everyone I'm dropping out of college to move to New York, and then I'm back in Ohio like 2 months later. So I've had tons of times when I've failed to my peer group and to my friends, and you have to. Like that's the thing I was most afraid of, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me was the Hackensack, New Jersey thing. Because you're just, like I said, you're never going to get it right the first time, and you have to get the bad ideas out of your system to even sort of get to the good ideas. And so I just think GitHub, if we had raised investment early, we would have built a sales team early, and we would have tried to scale and sell a thing that was different than what it turned into. And what it turned into was much more about the social collaboration stuff. At the beginning, it was way more about Git hosting and open source. And so the first version of GitHub, if people use GitHub, there were no pull requests. Those came over 2 years later. And so some people, if you use GitHub or you know people that use GitHub, they would say pull requests might be the killer feature of GitHub. It didn't happen for 2 years, right? Things like organizations, so the ability to even make a team, any group of any size on GitHub didn't come till over 2 years after launch. GitHub was only for individuals for the first 2 years. I was very, very adamant about that until I was the one that had to add groups, and then I wish I had been less adamant about that in the beginning. But so we had these opinions about how this thing was going to run, and they turned out to maybe be right for like the beginning, the small community, but they wouldn't have scaled. Like you can't sell to Berkeley. You can't teach a class on GitHub if there's no groups. It doesn't make any sense. So, but we sort of had to go through that. And I think ultimately when we did raise venture, again, people were like, oh, well, you all are like hypocrites and you're failures and there's all these things. But, the thing that I have learned is if you believe in what you're doing, it's so much easier to fail. It's really hard to fail when you're doing something you don't believe in, and you really have to fail a lot. And so I think there's something like ownership over the decision makes it easier to have ownership over the failure. And you really need to have that when you're starting a business and when you're doing things that are different, because you have to make lots of mistakes and you have to identify them quickly and course correct really quickly. And so I think that's something that we did well all along the way. And where this ties into the venture capital is by 2011, GitHub was growing a lot, way beyond what we had thought. And we were seeing competition in the commercial space with like big companies. And we never wanted to build GitHub for big companies. And so we were faced with, do we make it work for big companies or do we let someone else go build the GitHub of big companies? And that just made me so mad to think that there'd be some crappy version of GitHub out there that everyone would be using when we could be doing that. And that's what we did. So we started trying to build GitHub Enterprise. And we started building a sales team, and we were doing all this bootstrap on our own, and we had no idea. I'd never once bought software from a salesperson. So we had no idea how it worked. We didn't know what these salespeople were doing. We didn't know the people who were buying the software. So it did not go great. So when we eventually were like, we are committing to trying to build out an enterprise sales team and do this, because like this is the only way we can stay the biggest version of GitHub. We realized like this is a thing that you would go to an investor for that's not money. Is yes, they have money and they can give you money and you can go hire people, but they have experience and they have connections and they have other founders who have gone through it before and they know salespeople. And these things that you're maybe not ready for when you just have a product idea and you're trying to see if people like your product idea and you think your Octocat is cool, but you're not sure if you're going to keep it yet. I don't think that that's the time to bring in some business person, right? But once the product is good and it's working and there's people that like it, and now what you're talking about isn't what is the soul of the thing I'm creating, what is the personality, but like how do I scale this and reach other types of people that I don't know about, that know my ability to build something for myself. I've grown out of that. That has worked, right? And I've gotten so many people like me using it, but there are so many more people that aren't like me. And so hitting this local maxima and being like, okay, so then how do I now start building stuff for people who aren't me? That's when we were like, we just need help. And where do we go for that help? And we looked at a lot of places, and the best place to go in the greater Bay Area is right down to Sand Hill Road. So we started talking to all the investors. Well, we made them come to San Francisco. But they all came to San Francisco. They came up, all the big VCs, and we were like, we don't care about your money. We can get money from anywhere, and we're going to, but like, how can you help us build the best version of GitHub? And that was the pitches they gave us, and that's why we went with Andreessen Horowitz, and that's what we tried to do, and that's what I think that I don't know if we built the best version of GitHub, but we built the best version of GitHub that was physically possible, and so much of it came from their help. So I think it's really about like, do it with intentionality, do it for the fit of the place where you're at. Don't bring someone like Mark Andreessen into your garage when you're still on the whiteboard. I don't think that's what he does anymore. But when you have something that you believe in and you're trying to make a real business, I'm in video games. Like a lot of what I do right now is in video games. They're so clear about this. They have this thing they call finding the fun. I'm trying to build a prototype and make a game that people want to play. And I'm going quick, and it can be on paper, it could be on a whiteboard, but I want to make something fun. Okay, I've got that. Now I'm going into production. I'm going to go find a publisher. I'm going to get money. I'm going to have a 2-year timeline. I'm going to build a game. It's just so clear in the games industry. It's way fuzzier in like the tech industry. But I think that divide is pretty important. It's like having a space to create ideas, and then when you're ready, going to get help to build a company. That could be VC, that could be a mentor, it could be someone that went to this school. But I think it's really about like trying to find the right help at the right point for you. And no one is expecting me to say, take VC, don't take VC. But like that's how our version of it sort of played out. And I'm glad that we didn't take VC at the beginning, and then I'm glad that we did ultimately take VC at the end.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. It seemed like the early 2010s became this period where you were known as such an avid advocate for open source collaboration. It seemed like at every summit, conference, or keynote, you were up there speaking about its potential. Some critics of open source collaboration like to point out that having too many coders working on a project is like having too many chefs in the kitchen. When you integrate code from various developers and put it together, it can be riddled with challenges of incompatibility and fragmentation. So how do you facilitate the open source journey to circumvent those potholes?
Yeah, it's the same as the last answer. Like there's so few desktop applications that come out of open source. There are a million libraries, like pure code libraries or like tools or machines that come out of open source, like Linux and Unix and BSD here at Berkeley, TCP/IPsec. So I think it's the right tool for the job. And there's also the way you run an open source project is different. So you have some projects, right, where there is a benevolent dictator for life, a BDFL, and it's sort of one person's creative vision, they're guiding the project. Some projects are more run by a community, a consortium of companies. I almost scoffed at the idea that there's critics of open source. It's just at this point, I feel like having drank the Kool-Aid for decades, it's just another tool. And I'm not going to say every company should use it. GitHub isn't open source. But there's definitely places to use it. I think probably like a lot of the LLM stuff that's going on right now could massively benefit from being open source. I'm not sure that an application like Apple Photos would benefit a lot from being open source. But I think it's really pick and choose. And we talked about open source in GitHub itself a lot. And the other side of it is there's a cost to running a good open source project. Just like there's a cost to doing anything, but to bring in contributors and to be closing pull requests and working on issues. I think if you're talking about like starting a business, do I want my business to be open source? It's like, well, that is a cost that you're paying. Is the thing you're getting from it worth paying that cost? And for so many startups, the answer is yes, because like open source can literally just be a competitive advantage over an incumbent. But then there's the other side of that is like, okay, well now you have to maintain the project. And so are you hiring more engineers? Or are you trying to find engineers that are better at the written word on some sides of them so they can be working with contributors and writing lots of documentation and things like that? So for me, and that's a lot of what we did at GitHub when talking about like enterprise sales. It's just going to these big companies and having that conversation with them. It's like, well, what are your goals? What are you trying to get out of your software? And then you use like open source, open core, closed source, and that sort of thing along the way. I think probably what's really interesting is when a company creates a project and then like gives it to the community, like what happens there. So like Swift is going through this right now, where Apple created the programming language Swift, but they're trying to spin it into its own project with its own direction. And I wonder how long Apple's going to like let that happen. And there's going to be like one thing that the Swift group does that Apple doesn't like, and we'll see how they react. But I think that's probably what a lot of big companies are trying to figure out too. Like, how do we like let the baby bird out of the nest, but make sure that they come home for Thanksgiving kind of situation with open source?
Got it. Thank you for sharing. By the time GitHub was up and running, you had been in SF for almost a decade. And nowadays, social media has popularized the tech bro phenomenon. It likes to poke fun at the 20-something-year-old comp sci graduate who wears his company's Patagonia too much, pickleballs at 6 p.m., and rock climbs on weekends. As someone that's lived there for this long, how has the stereotype evolved to what it is now?
I don't know if I'm a tech bro or not, because I've never done any of those things, but also I worked with all those people pretty closely. So probably I'm like a little bit in both sides. I mean, I have very strong opinions about that. And what I like about programming and what I like about building stuff and what I like about starting companies is I like the community and I like the creator community. And yes, there's a lot of money to be made and you can become the next whoever you want to pick, Sam Altman or something. But ultimately, I think that there's a reason that we're not like trying to start oil companies or things like that. Like there's something interesting about this technology that goes beyond the earnings and the financial potential and things like that. So for me, like I feel that there are people here for every reason. There are people here because it's a great job. There's people here because they can make a lot of money. There's people here because they believe in doing something. There's people here because they think they can change the world. And I think for a long time, there wasn't a lot of money in it. And when you start getting a lot more money in something, you just start getting a lot more different types of people. And so I think a lot of what people would attribute to like programmers, or it's like one step removed from like popular frat culture, right? And when I was growing up, that culture was associated with finance and like Wall Street. And so to me, it's like, oh, this is exactly like the yuppie thing, but now it's just over on programmers and tech because of the same reason, because there's a bunch of money flooding into it. And it's distracting in a lot of ways, and it can be off-putting to people. But there's the other side of it is it's like the Bay Area. If anyone here is from a smaller city or like New York, like when you're growing up in Cincinnati and you're like into Dungeons and Dragons, you're like, there's not going to be anyone into Dungeons and Dragons in New York because it's not cool. But if people are laughing, the opposite is it's like that's where they all are. It's because there's just so many people that even like a small percentage group, there's going to be a ton of those people there, right? And like that's the beauty of having these bigger communities. And so I feel like there are a lot of people that are going to just be going to tech companies because they want to make money, and that's totally fine. Like we need people like that. But there are going to be people who are there because they love it and they're interested in what it's doing for the world, and they're interested in working at a place where they really care about either the technology or the people, or there's something there about it that's way more than this is just a job. I could have gotten a job anywhere else. And it used to be mostly those people. And then it got bigger, and now there's all sorts of people. But like all of those people are still there. I know those people, I work with those people. There are young people like that, there are older people like that. And so again, it's just like anything. It's a big city now, and there are going to be people that you don't want to work with and that you don't drive with and that are there for reasons other than you, but there are also going to be people that are there for the exact same reasons for you. And so like one of the things we were talking about before this, just in the late 90s, San Francisco, we called it like the bubble. I wasn't there, but the bubble, the first .com bubble, it's where Netscape Netscape, Mark Andreessen, co-founder, they had a web browser, one of the first ones. They were selling it. If you can imagine paying for a web browser. They went public. It was one of the first times like a tech startup went public that didn't really have it wasn't like a real company, but it like went public, and the stock went up. And so that's where a lot of this like hype around tech companies and all these kids in garages can make the next Microsoft happened in San Francisco in the late 90s. And most of these companies failed, and a lot of the money dried up. And when I first came to San Francisco, there was like tumbleweeds in South Park, which is the part of town that Twitter eventually started in, because they were still in like the hangover from the bubble popping and all this money going away, and no one really wanted to invest in San Francisco anymore. But there were companies that survived that. And one of them was eBay, and then one of them wasn't here, but it was Amazon. And so the reason you can look at these companies that survived the bubble, this inflationary period of hype and investment, and like what do they have in common? And it's like they kind of didn't buy into the hype. They said there's something happening here with the internet that's really exciting, and everyone's excited by it. And so there's all this money pouring in, and there's all these investors, and there's all these programmers, and there's all these dumb ideas for like pets.com and stuff happening in the late 90s. None of it is going to make sense and turn into a real business. But there were also people who were like, there's this cool thing called the internet, and we can build real businesses on it, and like I kind of don't care about what the hype people are doing. We have our own way of doing it. And so like Amazon is famous for building desks out of doors and 2x4s. And so in San Francisco, when everybody had the most expensive Palm Pilot and companies were raising money and then doing open bars and buying champagne, Amazon was being as cheap as they could possibly be. And then like surprise, the bubble pops, all the money goes away. All these companies that don't have revenue fail, and like who survives? Amazon survives. And why? It's like, well, they were never a part of the hype. What they saw was like what was real about the technology, probably what a lot of us saw growing up that was exciting about it. And they figured out like, well, to make a business off of this, I need to be like really smart about making a business. All these other hype companies following the hype, they just did what the other hype companies did, they're all gone. eBay is the same way. eBay famously has this story where they raised $5 million from Benchmark Capital, they put that money in the bank and they never touched it. And I think they got the advice, there's a book about it, right? But they were so successful, they built a business on their own. There's more of these companies that came out of the first dot-com bubble. I feel like that's happening right now, right? The LLM stuff, the AI stuff, it's really exciting, and there's really cool technology happening there. But at the same time, there's this massive hype where all these people are just rushing, like a gold rush, like what this whole part of the country is known for, to see what's gonna stick, right? And a lot of them know that, and the investors know that, and that's the game. I'm just gonna, investors wanna fund 10 companies and hope that one of them pops over 10 years. So there's nothing that's sort of underhanded happening here, but some of us, like, I think the point I'm trying to make here is like the eBays and the Amazons are out there, even with all of this hype, even with all of the LLM stuff. And I think like, unless this time is different, which it never is, the bubble's gonna pop, the hype is gonna retract. It's probably not gonna be as bad as it was in the 90s, but a bunch of these little LLM companies are gonna go away, and you know which ones I'm talking about, the million note-taking app companies and things like that. And who's gonna be left are like the real businesses with the real technologies. And that's happening right now. So that's something that's like really, really exciting to me. And when I think about, again, like my journey and like the programmers and how me now having seen a couple of these hype cycles where there's a bubble and there's all these people coming in and the recessions, like the things that really last, it never changes. It's like real people who care about what they're building, that are trying to make smart decisions about their customers, that are thinking intently about their own problem, and that ultimately know like there's no playbook. And just because someone did it some way before doesn't mean anything. Like the only playbook is being really smart about what you're doing is in front of you. So anyway, sorry. I'm really excited right now because of this. Like I look around, I see all the LLM stuff and the hype, and a lot of my friends are just so skeptical. And they're like, this is just another bubble, and it's all gonna pop, and we're just gonna be left holding the bag, and all these people are gonna be unemployed. And probably that is gonna happen, and there's gonna be a lot of bad stuff. But there's gonna be some really cool stuff that's gonna come out of it that's gonna change, the way everything is for the next whatever time. And that's exactly what happened in the first bubble. It's exactly what happened with Web 2.0 when the housing market crashed around 2007, 2008, which is when GitHub started, which is when Dropbox started, which is when Stripe started, which is when so many of these companies started. And I feel like we're in another one right now, which is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Moving back to the developer standpoint, you mentioned in a 2014 keynote that software development isn't really about software, it's about people. But as AI becomes more prominent, coding more automated, how do you think collaboration among developers is going to change?
Well, that depends. I mean, I will ask this group. I mean, it depends on if we think we're going to hit AGI, ASI, or if LLMs are a dead end. And there's two different answers there. One is that the robots will kill us all, and one is that we have what we have now to just be like way better. And I think if you take that and you just project it out, if anyone's using these AI coding things today, it solves one giant class of problems, and there's still a million other problems that you have out there. If like you're working with other people, you're coordinating, you're still in like Slack, you're managing the AI bots, right? If anyone has done anything beyond vibe coding with a prompt, you need to really like ride these things and have them knowing what the issues that they're fixing are and give them documentation. So like the world we have right now, if no one ever writes a single line of code ever again, there's still so much work to be done, right? And so then it's like, okay, is the AI going to take over all of that stuff? Ultimately, unless they get smarter than us and ASI happens, like it's still going to be the same thing it's always been, which is like people trying to figure out how they can communicate and work on things together. And like even right now with the best computers, you just can't beat two people sitting down next to each other, like building a table. Like there's no form of computer-based collaboration that will ever top two people building a table, right? Because it's high bandwidth, we can see each other, you have immediate feedback. Like that's the holodeck. That's what we're all shooting towards and aspiring to. So the programming thing that LLMs are doing right now, which is phenomenal, that's great. But that is like not the hard problem. The hard problem has always been people. And like that's why all these companies fail, like all these startups, right? None of them are not good at programming. We have no lack of good programmers in Silicon Valley. The problem with creating new businesses and the new products is not lack of programming. It's something else, right? So what is that other thing? And that other thing, it's way more important in a world where robots are doing more of the coding and more of the work for us, right? So I think that it's really fun for me to be using these coder bots to do things, but it also shows, I think, how important collaboration and I'm not even talking about like human creativity. Like there is this whole other school of, right, we want things that people made, there's human creation. I'm a fan of that, right? Like I think that there's a certain amount of, we're leaving the attention economy and we're entering the care economy. How much care did you put into something sort of will give me an idea of how much I should care about it, right? Here's an example. If you look at a lot of these AI game engines right now, and you go to their webpage, you'll see 100 games that were AI generated by someone in 2 seconds. Should I spend more than 2 seconds playing any of those games, right? And the answer is no. What I want to do is I want to have an experience that a human had curated for me, because right now, that's probably going to be a better experience. But in the future, we're going to be so inundated with AI-created stuff that it's going to be like, well, how do I choose what to watch? And I think the biggest thing is going to be someone on the other end said that this is worth watching. And so if that world happens, right, you're still looking for communication between humans. The worst boss I ever had told me one of the smartest things I ever heard, and it makes me so mad. He told me that the only thing the internet will ever do for anyone is communication. And he said that in like a know-it-all way. But there's something great there, which is like, if you try to make it that simple, it opens a lot of doors for you. The internet's not going to cut grass, right? It's not going to build stuff. It's not going to actually take the video. But if you think about it, the internet as a way just to like reach someone else, and that's the only thing that it does, and the only thing you think about, well then it's like, well that's still our main problem, is reaching each other. And I feel like in a world where AI and LLMs are doing almost everything, what does that look like for you? You're on a beach somewhere. Okay, well then like how are you calling from that beach to the other person in your company? There's still human communication involved at every part of it. So I think like if I'm talking about what the hype is right now, everyone right now is still caught, a lot of the big consumer LLM stuff right now is still caught on like, oh, isn't it magic that I can talk to ChatGPT and it talks back to me? And they're like trying to commercialize that and build something around that first magical moment, right? But if you're like, the question you're asking me is coming from this world where like a lot of programmers are so far beyond that first magical moment because the coding stuff is so good, right? And so you kind of like, the video stuff is really immature, the image stuff is just getting good, the coding stuff has been good for a while, and we can see what it looks like 2 years from now, and it's still a lot of work for humans, is the point I'm trying to make. And so I just would love to get to a world where the LLMs are automating more and more human stuff, but like, the world is not really getting more productive, right? And it's like these highways where they add more lanes and they instantly get filled. It's like people are finding more things to do, and that is sort of like a scary thing, but I also think that that is really like a lot of what the opportunity is and a lot of what I'm working on.
And as we end the near of our discussion, as we near the end of our discussion, I wanted to ask you a question about the video game industry. You've mentioned in interviews that as a kid, You learned programming to create video games. With launching Null Games in 2023, you revisited that dream, this time as an indie game publisher. How did your industry experience influence your support for indie game projects specifically, as opposed to the larger budget, mass appeal AAA projects?
Yeah, indie games are cool because they're small businesses. That's something I really like about it. And so it's people who are trying to make art, but they're trying to make a living off of their art. It's usually like 1 to 5, 7, 12 people. They're mostly on revenue share. So, a lot of VCs, it's equity-based. They buy part of your company, and then what they're trying to do is have you go public or sell. And that's really the only way that they can turn their investment into money. The amount of profit and revenue you make doesn't matter, right? It only matters to public investors who are trying to buy or sell your stock. But in the video game industry, they care about revenue a lot. They care about profit sharing, they care about revenue deals and things like that. So it's interesting to live in that world where you're not thinking about the enterprise value of the company and how good is the GitHub brand, but you're thinking about like, how many people can I get to buy this video game? And then how much can I sort of optimize the cost of that to make sure that people can go make a second video game? So that's fun, but at the same time, it's also like programming. It's a lot of programming involved, which is something that I like. But unlike tech stuff and GitHub stuff, there's all these other arts. Git is innovative because it's so good with text. What Git did is it said, I'm only going to care about text. By trying to make a version control system that will work well for images, you're losing things. And so I'm going to say it doesn't work at all for images, it just works for text, it's just for programmers, it's the best thing ever for programmers. So that's like where you have the Git and the GitHub world. And it's why a lot of video games don't use Git and GitHub, because they're not just text. They are images and movies and more things. And so there is a side of that industry that you don't see from GitHub, but it's also a different way of building software where almost every game has more artists than it does programmers. It'll have people doing like animation or just illustrations. You have different people doing cutscenes versus the video game. So it's like a heavily creative, technical industry where they're using tools. And like the thing I'm saying before, a lot of the problems that they have are not creating art or writing code, it's communication. It's syncing things. Like imagine like Fortnite, right? People who've played it or knows what it is. The map is gigantic, right? So imagine you as an artist trying to work on that map. Like they have to have so much tooling and so much coordination to get someone to be able to work on that map because it's just a huge file. And so like they're building software around that. That is building software specifically like for humans, which I think is super interesting. And the video game industry has a lot of like opportunities for innovation there. But it goes back to creative people building stuff that they are the consumer of. And the reason I started GitHub in the first place, excuse me, the other side of it is like all their tools are really bad because there's not a lot of money in those tools. And so like the version control thing, there's not really good version control for video games and things like that. So a lot of what I'm working on right now are like game engines to make new games and version control systems to build games with version control. And it's really cool. It's like a bizarro alternate dimension from tech where they're using a lot of the same tooling, but the culture is really different because there's this divide where they're not using GitHub as much, they're not using some of the same tools as much, but maybe they're still writing JavaScript, but they've never made a web page, which is really fun for me to jump between both of those worlds.
Got it. Well, thank you, Chris. That actually wraps up all the questions I have for you. And with that, let's please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for moderating.
Of course. So with that, we're ready to move on to the audience Q&A portion. So if you have a question for Chris, please raise your hand and we'll find a way to give you a mic. Yeah, in the black shirt.
I mean, it's so simple that they're already paying for GitHub. I mean, it's really that simple. It's just so hard to get into the door of any of these companies. And the other side of it, if you're like you working at this company and you want to use GitHub, it can be hard for you to convince someone to buy it, right? Or like to get whatever on there. And that was a lot of what we did way before Copilot, just trying to get GitHub into enterprise. Was like, how do, like the programmers there want GitHub, we want GitHub obviously, but like their boss doesn't know anything. How do we convince them this is something that their boss should be paying for? And like that was it. That was why we raised money in 2012. That was the whole thing that GitHub has been trying to do, is like, you can trust us with your code, right? We do have a silly Octocat, but like that's like what that gets you is like your developers are going to love working for you because they're going to love using GitHub because we have a silly Octocat. Not really, but like that's how we complain to the managers. But the other side of it is like, this is a serious enterprise tool. Look at these other companies that use it. And these people at these big companies, right? Like procurement, does anyone know what that word is? There's entire jobs, procurement at big companies like GE, and they're like the buyers, right? And so someone whose whole job is buying software, like you could imagine like Dungeons and Dragons, right? There's like a lingo, and there's a way that world works. And so like me, Ohio boy, walking in there, like trying to sell them GitHub Enterprise, they would know right away that I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? I have no business being in that room. That's a place where I need to go get an investor, get some like salespeople, figure out. That makes them trust you, right? And it might feel really smoke and mirrors, but like showing them that you are going through the motions and doing the things to be a responsible company, to look the way a responsible company looks, that's a big part of it. So the front end is like having salespeople that are there for them, having sales engineers that are available for them, having someone that they can call. We never had a phone number on github.com. Why would we? But having that there for them. And then there's things you can do, like certifications you can get government certified, you can do all these things for your actual software that now, like SOC 2 compliance is one we have in the US. I see a lot smaller and smaller startups have these things really early because they know like this is what these enterprise companies are looking for. And like there are things that you'll never get in the door of a Walmart if you don't have these. And so you can either plan to get Walmart in 3 years or you can try to get these things now to go after Walmart. And so Copilot, I don't think would have happened if we had not put in all of that work ahead of time. And then it's like, well, you're already paying for GitHub. GitHub is like compliant. You trust GitHub. You want to turn on the new AI thing, or do you want to go do all of that over again from scratch for Cursor, right? And so it's just like bureaucracy. It's like red tape. And that was why we almost didn't want to raise venture capital and stay bootstrapped. It's like, do I even want to go into that world of this? But it's yes. And now look where it got us. It's like, I think it's cool as hell that biggest oil companies are using Copilot. I think that's awesome. They could be using something much worse and that would be horrible. But yeah, the trust, the building that over years, and like professionalizing, taking these things seriously, those are all the things that we kind of figured out we had to do and have done, and that's the reason it's working.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak with us today. I was just curious because I noticed you emphasized a lot like the importance of communication and just like general human communication with each other. And I'm wondering how you think that translates to the importance of like communicating well with your co-founders or like your founding team. Because I've spent like some time in like startup spaces as well, and I know very well it can be a make or break. So I'm just curious to hear about your experience like in that team dynamic.
Well, if you haven't Googled me yet, or any of the GitHub co-founders, yeah, we had some drama a while ago. It's really tough. I mean, you are just in it with someone, right? And this is what it's about. Any human relationship where you're like deep in it for years. What is that? It's like a romantic partner. It's like being in a band. It's like being in a lab group. It's just like having friends, having siblings. They're tough. They're tough relationships. And the reason that ours fell apart behind the GitHub founders is that from the very beginning, we were not on the same page with what we were going for. It started with me and Tom. Eventually there were 4 founders, me, Tom, PJ, and Scott. And all of us contributed in big ways to GitHub's success. And everyone brought something, especially in the early days, hands-on stuff that contributed. But ultimately, when it got bigger and there started to be lots of more disagreements than agreements, it was because we all had different North Stars. And we just couldn't get on the same page about what we wanted our North Star to be. So for now, whenever I do anything with anyone, that is the very first conversation that we have, is like, what are we trying to do? What's our big goal? And then what are the scenarios? Things are going to shift along the way, obviously. So if it goes great, what does that look like? If it doesn't go great, if we have to pivot, right? If we have to completely change our business model, if we have to do a layoff, Like, these are never conversations you want to have when you start. But when we raised money for GitHub, we never said, okay, so this means we're either going to IPO or sell, right? Because those are the only two options. But the founders never sat down and said that to each other. Because if we didn't take that money, we had another option, which was stay private forever and just build a profitable business and never have to do anything. But by raising money, we said we're not going to go that. We're giving up that path. And like, we never sat down and had those conversations. And I think if you don't have those when things are going well, then when shit hits the fan, like, you're just, it's so bad, right? If you're not even working well together when things are calm, when things are bad, it's never going to go well. And so, I mean, go read about what happened with me and Tom, and read about it from the perspective that he and I had different visions for where the company should go, right? Just think about that when you read about what happened with GitHub and the founders and stuff. And like, that's ultimately what it was. It's like, if we can't agree on the why, we're never going to agree on the what. So I actually think now you could probably find a co-founder that maybe you wouldn't be friends with. Maybe you wouldn't want to, like, you know, be a long-term best friend with. Maybe you wouldn't be like a drinking buddy or whatever with, because those are like, for a lot of us, like our default criteria of like, do I like being around this person? But you don't have to like being around this person, right? What you really need to do is you need to be compatible towards building a like good company. You need to be able to work well with that person. I have tons of people that I work well with that I'm not friends with, you know, and I'm sure you do too. I have people that I'm friends with that I would never want to work well with. And that was very confusing to me. I thought I had to be friends with all of my co-founders. I thought I had to be friends with all those people, but you have to have like good work compatibility, and that comes from shared goals. And so that, I think, is for me the biggest thing in finding a co-founder, is like, do we really have the shared what we're going for? And then do we have a shared, how are we gonna change it along the way? So like, for one of my video game companies, like, we're never not gonna do video game stuff. There's no pivot that's gonna be out of the video game industry. And that was something that was clear to us, that we talked about. But that's not true for every company. Slack was making a video game. And then they were developing chat internally. And they realized that was the bigger thing. So they pivoted from a literal video game to Salesforce's chat platform, right? So like, is that okay, right? So like, I'm starting a video game company, and me and the founders are saying we're never gonna do that. Like, if that happens to us, let's spin Slack out, right? Like, that's the way we're gonna take it. This is a video game company. I think those conversations that you don't think to have when you're starting are really important. You know, are we on the same page with where we're going? Because then you can then you can argue about, and you should argue, how do we get there? Like, those are the disagreements you wanna have, not where are we going.
And these things were maybe things that went against like what the broader environment might have been kind of saying at you. I'm curious in those points, like, were there external things, whether people or media, that helped you take the courage to make those decisions to follow kind of what you felt like was the most right?
I think it was a lot of fear of the failure. For me, of like going to New York and failing there, that was like a better failure for me than not having tried anything and not knowing what to do. I think like the point I'm trying to make with like my first couple questions that were like meandering, I have a friend who has a daughter who's in college, and she goes to the other Berkeley. She goes to the Berkeley School of Music, and I was talking to her a couple months ago. We were together. And she was like, I feel really lost right now. Like, I don't know, 21 years old, right? And I don't even know if I want to pursue music anymore. And she was talking to me because it was like the things that I'm trying to disabuse you of, like, oh, you have all your shit together. And at 21, you had your shit together too. And I was like, you are in the best possible time in your life to be lost. And like, so was I. And I think like, for me, it was like being open-minded and not depressed and hard on myself about it. And certainly feeling like I need to figure something out, but not being like, because I haven't figured it out by now, I'm wrong. And because I was like open to these things and knew that I was like lost and knew that I didn't have my plan together, like I found my plan. Like it came to me, and it came to me in some ways like way later than it would for other people. But in other sides of it, it was way earlier, you know? And so I think like that's sort of, when I look back, one of the things that I did right unintentionally was not try to like overcommit too soon and really try to figure out what's a thing that I think I can do, like go the distance with. And what I can go the distance with is something that like I care about and I believe in. And I mean, for me, the fear was like, did anyone ever see the movie Office Space? It came out when I was, it's by Matt Groening, who created like King of the Hill and Simpsons and things like that. It's like this 1999 comedy about how bad it is to work in an office. Those were the things that were motivating me, right? Is I just don't want to go there, and I think the other thing is like knowing that failure is okay. Like it's not about being right, and that's something that I think our egos teach us, is that we want to be right, but you don't actually want to be right. You want to be good. You want to do something that's good, and anyone who does something good is wrong many, many times to get there. And so I think like that, knowing that from the early days is like, it drives my wife nuts. I'm not afraid to be bad at something. And I will try something and I will make a mess of it before I go to YouTube sometimes. It's not always the best quality. But I think if you're creating stuff, if you're starting stuff, and it could be a business with a financial business plan that you're getting investment from, but anything new, I think you really have to know this is going to break a bunch of times. And that's the way it works. One of the best engineers I ever worked with, Aman Gupta, GitHub is TMM1. He works at Cursor right now. He told me, never expect software to work. And it's not a cynical thing. It's saying like the best engineers know the stuff is going to break. Like in that, like again, our intuition growing up, when a glass breaks, when a TV breaks, it's a really bad thing. But when the product that you're building breaks, when your idea breaks, that your business breaks, these are good things. You're learning from these things, and they're not the same thing as the projector going out right now, even though it might feel that way, even though it might be as embarrassing. So I think I don't know, had no shame, had too much shame, just had this idea that like I could make these mistakes. I think part of it too, I came to San Francisco, I didn't know anyone, so I like didn't have a lot of the social pressures that maybe other people had, and I just can't overemphasize enough the like failing, not being afraid to fail, being on a team that embraces that. Ben Affleck, there's a story, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon wrote Good Will Hunting. They won an Oscar. I think they were like in college when they wrote it. And when they first met, Ben said to Matt, please judge me by my best ideas and not my worst ideas. And I think like that's what we're talking about here. When we're creating something, that's a movie, but it's similar even if you're starting a business. It's like you got to work with people and you need to trust yourself to be able to make lots of bad ideas, because it's the only way you're going to get to something like pull requests 2 years into GitHub that then becomes the GitHub killer feature that everyone knows it for today. So, but no, believe in yourself. Maybe that's what I'm going to end this with. Like I believed in myself. That's it. That's it. And I didn't even know why. And I didn't need a good reason to, but like if you don't have your back, who else does, right? And I hope everyone here does believe in yourself, because you've come to this school, you've come to this thing after school. Like just going to these things is a huge part of it. And I think it's just like going with your gut, believing in yourself. It's like the best thing I've ever done. It's the thing I try to tell everyone. Don't even listen to people like me. Don't listen to people that have done it before. And if everyone that's super smart and successful has done something and you think it should be done the other way and you're not sure, just like always go with what you believe in, because like I said before, it's so much easier to own mistakes when they're mistakes that you have made and you were like fully bought into and believed. And anytime I've made a big mistake that was like something I like didn't believe in, it's just the worst. And I always feel so gross about it. And like anytime that I've made a mistake, sometimes hugely public mistakes that I like fully believed in, that's okay. Like that's an okay place to be. It's much worse to make mistakes that you don't believe in. So anyway, I think I could probably I talk a lot, but yeah, I really appreciate you all listening, and I don't want to gas anyone up too much, but like this is the stuff that I did, right? And so I can't say that like my path was great, but I can tell you what helped me was like meeting people, was going to things, by like making myself available and not being too down on myself, and not judging myself by what other people were doing. You know, like there were founders younger than me, there's people more successful than me, there's companies bigger than me, and like you really need to, I think, figure out what you're looking for and get okay with that early, because that'll just like be the best thing for you in terms of your success and working with other people.
Okay, well, that's our time. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and let's please give Chris one final round of applause.
Thanks so much for coming and asking.